Hello and welcome to the St. Paul Lutheran Church Planning Committee Congregational Forum. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation on behalf of the Planning Committee, Jackie Arnhold, Jim Brock, myself, Phil Burbank, Mary Beth Glick, Kate Oliver, and Warren Scheit, our chair. We want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation so we can share this information with you so that you will be well informed as the recommendations that the Planning Committee is making. The reason for this forum is we want to get your feedback. We've got a questionnaire that's available for you to kind of tell us what your thoughts are on the information that we're going to be presenting in this presentation. We want to make sure that your ideas are also included in what we're doing. So if you have any feedback that you think that maybe we've overlooked something, we want to know from you, and also what your thoughts are as far as what the information is we're presenting here in this presentation. Let us know what your thoughts are. We'd like to hear back from you, and we'll ask again at the end of the presentation. So a little bit of history. Initially, we were kicked off on a 30-year plan back in 2005, concluding in 2035. That original phase was that original plan was broke into 3 phases. And the first phase was looking at the construction of the new church, which was completed back in 2009. And the Dora Fisher loan, which was in the original plan, need to be paid back before we look at any additional costs that we would incur as far as new construction. So we know the Dora Fisher Fund will be paid back in 2022, so that opens the door for us to be looking a little more aggressively at what we're going to do with our master plan, for our 30-year plan, and then phase 2 was the addition of the Christian education wing, which if you look over on the illustration on the left, which was our original master plan from 2005, you can see the yellow area and the orange area showing the part of the building that doesn't exist yet. And we're looking at what needs to change there with the changes that have happened to the congregation, and make sure that what we're doing fits for the ministry of the church. And then phase 3, which was the cemetery expansion. Originally, the idea was that once the Christian education wing was done and the preschool was moved down to the same building as the sanctuary and the fellowship hall, that the Christian education building at the top would be demolished, that one at the top of the hill, and then that would allow us to have additional cemetery expansion. But since 2015, there was some land acquired for the church, and that's since taken away the urgency to have the cemetery expansion done. So phase 3 is what we're saying is completed at this time. So what we're really doing is looking at focusing on phase 2, and that's what the Planning Committee has been doing this year so far with our initial plans for phase 2. So the main thing that comes out of that, though, is what about the chapel? We have originally been tasked by the Planning Committee from the voters back in 2020 to incorporate as much as possible of the chapel and its contents into our master plan. So bringing that into our phase 2. We want to really figure out how that fits into the 30-year plan and how we can utilize that, or if the other options are doing a demolition of the building. So, which is not something that this planning committee will be recommending, but we will be looking at pricing for that just to see, as comparisons, what options are. So this is a slide I'll be referring to several times, but this is our breakdown of phase 2. What we're looking at is with the addition of the preschool and the Sunday school classrooms, phase 2, we're also adding in relocating the bell from the bell tower. There's some structural issues and some concerns about the longevity of the bell to maintain itself in the bell tower. There's some structural issues. I don't think it's anything urgent, but there would be some concern about how the bell would stay in the bell tower over a long period of time. Also looking at repurposing the chapel and the addition of the Christian education wing. So first thing I'm going to be doing is looking at the relocating of the bell and the new bell tower that we're proposing. So this is looking at some drawings that we received from Entheos Architects. And Entheos was the original architecture designer for the church that we used. And what they've done is they've styled something that would be kind of fit into the architecture of our church, with the archways that kind of match the side windows. And what we would be doing would be locating this in the front lawn, about 45 degrees off from the front sanctuary. You can kind of see there's a sidewalk that would come up and around that bell tower, so you can look up and actually see the bell and the workings in the bell tower. The bell tower would be about 25 foot tall, and our goal with this addition of relocating the bell and putting in the bell tower, we'd like to have that done by 2023, which is our church's 175th anniversary celebration. And we'd like this to kind of be like a main feature that's a kickoff for our 175th, and kind of a way to commemorate our 175th. So this is the plan that we have so far from Entheos. Now, one of the key players in relocating the bell is Verdun, and they are located in Cincinnati, and they're nationally known for clock towers, bell towers. So they were one of the first people, they were the initial people that we looked into for doing this bell tower. They would be responsible for removing the bell from the current steeple and doing the bell tower construction and the remote ringing equipment. They wouldn't oversee any of the foundation or landscaping work that we would have to do in front of the church. And one of the things that we kind of liked is that they will be taking the bell out and doing a restoration on it. Before they actually take it to Cincinnati for restoration, we'll be able to bring it into the gathering area right outside the sanctuary and have it on display, kind of to make it something that we can all see, and see that history that's coming from our old chapel before we restore it and bring it back into our worship service down at the new sanctuary. So it's the bell's unique in the fact that it is 38 inches in diameter at the broadest point at the base, and due to its size, it requires a very robust structure to actually hold it in place. So it'll be a fairly good-sized bell tower, having 6 to 8 inch support beams, I believe, and we can't wait to see it actually brought back down, so that it can be part of our service again instead of just up on the hill in the chapel. So looking at the responsibility that Verdun would have as far as the removal, the restoration, the construction of the bell tower, and remote ringing equipment, that comes in at $118,000. The concrete work that we'd have to do is $27,600. Permits, stonework, landscaping, ground lighting that we'd do to accent the bell tower from the ground would be $76,000. Our total project would come in at $215,000 to $230,000. And we've had a seed gift from a generous donor of $100,000 to go towards this project. So for Verdun to get started, they have to have 50% up front. So with this seed gift, we can go ahead and get Verdun rolling on the project, which really kind of speeds us up as far as making sure that we can go ahead and have some of this work starting to get us to that 175th anniversary celebration to get the work started. So if I go back to our original objectives, Phase 2, Part 1, relocating the bell tower, looking again at that $215,000 to $230,000. We have private funds coming in of $100,000 if we move forward with this project, which means the remaining congregational commitment would be $130,000 for the relocation of the bell and the construction of the bell tower. Next, I'm going to be looking at repurposing the chapel. And if we look back at our original master plan, There was some if you look on the left-hand side, you'll see that there is a future maintenance and storage area that was designated behind the fellowship hall. And since then, you can see I've kind of shown at the upper image that there's I got a blue block there kind of representing where that would be. But that kind of shows roughly what we would be looking at there if we were to put that storage facility in there. So it's about 2,176 square feet. We have some questions right now as far as how it would be accessed with some of the road and septic risers that's back behind there, so there had to be some reworking for that building. So it got us looking at if there was a storage building there, is there a better way we can do it, a better way that we can locate it? And then the discussion went to repurposing the chapel to actually take that need for storage and utilize the chapel to be part of that storage need that we would have. Currently that maintenance storage would be used for ECM storage, seasonal storage, and church groups that they would use that storage for. So we started looking at the chapel, repurposing and preserving the chapel and using it for storage. And this would be looking at the exterior of the church. We'd be trying to restore it to its, as close as we could to its original design. So doing kind of a historical restoration on the outside. Of course, the bell, like I mentioned, would come out for the bell tower. There'd be no public access to the building, but we try to make this as maintenance free as possible. One way that we would do that is we'd remove the 1950s entrance that's currently on the building. Now, with the current design of that flat roof, there is a tendency for water to gather there. And we do see some water penetration into the rest of the building, which causes a little bit of a mold issue. So if we could restore the original appearance, reduce the mold issue by removing that 1950s entrance. We'd also look at removing all the plaster on the inside, removing the bell, using long life paint on the exterior of the building so there wouldn't have to be painting done periodically, or as much painting done periodically. Removal of trees and shrubs that rub up against the church, and kind of make it more of a historical look. Because you drive by, it would be a little more noticeable than maybe it even is now. We look at removing the stained glass and going with some opaque glass that would go in there, and then we look at removing the stained glass windows and using those down in the addition that we would do for the Christian education wing. We'd also be removing sidewalks. We'd also look at to make sure that there's no issues in the future. Even the floor joists would come out. We would fill the basement in and pour a concrete floor in there. And the main reason we're looking at this is we're going with a very aggressive view on the storage here. We want to make sure that we don't leave the floor in there and then 15 years from now we find out the floor's sagging and we have to put more money back into the chapel. We're looking at a way to make this as robust of a design for the outside historical preservation of the chapel, and then also utilizing the inside so we can try to keep the maintenance down on this so it's not something that continually drives cost out of the church budget. So this is the plan that we currently have for the chapel being converted into storage and restoring the historical outlook of it. So would there ever be the possibility that the chapel would be repurposed for a chapel again? Could we ever use it as a church again? And over the last 16 years, there was always this thought that it could be used as a worship space, or they'd be used for weddings, small funerals, but that's never happened. It's kind of been time tested that there's never been a need for that. The opportunities just don't exist. And then moving forward, we even see that being less of a chance that anyone would request that, as the people who already have a history of it, they're getting older and they may not be wanting to request that as much in the future. So we see that not being something that would move forward in the future. So we also wanted to kind of do our due diligence here and looking at, what are our options here. If we could repurpose the chapel and use it for storage, the other option is, do we need to demolish it? And I just, again, want to reiterate, the planning committee is very against demoing this building. We feel like there is a historical preservation here that needs to happen, because this is kind of, one of the first chapels that we started in, and it's kind of our history, and we want to make sure that that legacy continues for as long as we can make it happen. So, but to look at the pricing, even if we were to do the demolition and then create a storage building, because if you do demolish the church, we still have a storage need. So we would be looking at recovering the stained glasses that's in the church, which is around $10,000 to do that. The demolition of the chapel, some of the pricing we had in over a year ago was $65,000. The church is 2,176 square feet, which is similar to what we need for the pole barn construction. And the pole barn would be $97,200. Now, there's also some concern about the historic cemetery that's noted around the outside, that's already been deemed as a historical site. We don't know what would happen to the preservation of that historic cemetery if the chapel were to be removed. The chapel's not tied to it, but we don't know what that would do to the cemetery at this time, so we'd have to do some further investigation on that. And then there's also a retaining wall around the outside that $65,000 would cover removing, giving the highway right-of-ways back, moving that wall in a little bit more, and that would be around $65,000. So estimated total for the demolition, construction of a storage building is around $237,000. In comparison, if we look at the chapel preservation and repurposing, the interior work that we do would be around $208,000. The exterior windows and doors that we'd be replacing would be $62,000. And just so you know, the exterior windows and doors, on the front, it would kind of give you that new restored front entry. But on the back, it would probably be a set of like 4-foot double doors that wouldn't look like a overhead door or a garage door, as much as it would just look like two very large openings that would still be large enough you could even pull a lawnmower or maybe a small tractor in. The exterior preservation, which would be power washing, painting, any woodwork that has to be repaired, general conditions, and then also the retaining wall, which still has to be dealt with on both of these two plans. Estimated total would be $360,000 to $380,000. So the difference there between the two projects of demolition versus repurposing is a difference of $133,000. So this planning committee is going to be recommending that we move forward with the chapel preservation and repurposing, because we really feel like the historical significance of keeping that building outweighs the cost difference of the $133,000. So looking back again at our objective for phase 2, you can see now I've got the prices shown here for the relocating of the bell and the bell tower, and also the repurposing of the chapel, and putting those prices out there as well. Looking next at the addition of the Christian education wing, which is point 3 for our phase 2. Originally, this, again, I've got the image of the 2005 master plan shown here. And the original master plan was based on the future needs back in 2005. Well, since 2005, the ECM has grown. For example, they've added to kindergarten, afternoon classes. They've added before and after school care. In addition to the ECM, the church ministries have grown too. So youth is getting bigger. We have a Hispanic ministry. So the planning committee has held interviews with all of the current staff in assessing the future needs of the congregation. And our goal is to review all of those interviews and glean all the information out of the needs and the wants, and look with an architect to say how we can incorporate as much of those needs and wants into the addition. So the master plan that you see on the left here, you're going to see that change quite a bit, because we would see that we've grown a little bit more, and we would have to see how we would encompass doing that. So the plan is once we reviewed all that, met with an architect, that during the year of the 175th anniversary, we'd like to have the opportunity to have those plans available as far as what we've come up with. And then that way we can share that with you, and you can see what we're striving for in the future. Again, we think that the time that we'll need to do that is probably going to be at least another year from now before we'd have plans available to review. So it'd be in time for our 175th anniversary, and start making plans as how we're going to fund that, and what the design of that would look like in the future. So that's a work in progress. So we'll keep working on that and update you as we make headway on that project. So just to sum up what we've got so far for phase 2, which is looking at the historical preservation of the chapel and the bell. Currently those totals up to $575,000 to $610,000. Minus the private funds that we've had specified from individuals is $100,000, and looking at the remaining amount would be $475,000 to $510,000. So that's what we'd be looking at as far as what would have to be raised to get this work done. So looking at funding opportunities, we have a recommendation on how we can actually come up with that money. So what we're recommending is that the Friends of Clifty Church, which would be headed up by a leadership team from current members of St. Paul's, and they'd report directly to the church council. And this leadership team would strive to build a community of members from a broad base of supporters from St. Paul's Church and the surrounding communities. What they'd really be doing is they would be acting as the fundraisers, and they'd also be working as the building committee for this project. The Friends of Clifty Church would carry out the preservation and the repurposing of the chapel. They'd also apply for grants and seek donations from groups such as the Heritage Funds, past St. Paul alumni, other area LCMS churches. They could come up with a large list of people that they could try to approach and look for grant opportunities to help fund our historical preservation of the chapel and relocation of the bell tower. Like I mentioned, this group would oversee. This group, overseen by the leadership team, would be responsible for fundraising, doing the remodeling project, and also setting a timeline for how long that work takes to get done. What we'd really be looking for is if anybody who has leads as far as grants, if you're able to write grants, if you're a financial supporter, if you have time and talents that you want to put into helping out with the preservation project. These are all the things that would make you a friend of Clifty Church, and also sharing those resources that you have available. That's what we're really looking for, is to build a large group of people that come together and are the Friends of Clifty Church, headed up by that leadership team. And also looking at any funds that are donated after, that are above and beyond the cost of repurposing, would be that could be used for continual upkeep costs of the chapel as they were necessary. So this is kind of what our goal would be as far as a way to fund this project, which wouldn't be a direct burden on the congregation in the form of pledges. So what we'll be recommending to the council and also the voters coming up in November is the planning committee would be recommending to create the following: the bell tower building committee, since the funds have already been laid out there that someone's willing to donate $100,000. That would pay for half of the cost to get Vernon up and running on our bell repurposing and restoration. And then also look at forming the Friends of Clifty Church Committee and getting that leadership team together and get that team focused on what their goal is going to be, so they can set a timeline and start looking at how they can acquire the funds that we need to move forward with this project. So this concludes the presentation that the Planning Committee has put together. I want to take this time to say we need your feedback. If you can contact the church office, we can make sure that you can get a forum feedback, so you can let us know what if any issues that you have that are, needs to be addressed. If what your willingness to support these recommendations would be. And just want to thank you again for taking the time, and may God bless your day. Thanks.